professors. I, Anushka Saxena, will be the host for the final session of day one of Mazi of Mustaqbil, the beloved fest of the Department of History, Lady Shriram College for Women. The theme for our fest is art as resistance, and we've seen this theme talked about across various sessions today. And this session aims to explore a very pertinent subset of this broader theme, which is titled The Aesthetics of Discrimination. Our speaker for the session, as we all know, is Honorable Mr. T. M. Krishna. Sir is a renowned vocalist and musician. As a public intellectual, he speaks and writes about issues affecting the human condition and about matters of culture. He has started and is involved in many organizations whose work is spread across the whole spectrum of music and culture. He has co-authored Voices Within Carnatic Music, Passing On an Inheritance, a book dedicated to the greats of Carnatic music. His path-breaking book, A Southern Music, The Carnatic Story, published by HarperCollins in 2013, was a first of its kind philosophical, aesthetic, and social political exploration of Carnatic music. His music poetic relationship and partnership with India's leading contemporary Tamil writer, Perumal Murugan, is unprecedented because rarely has a poet and a musician who are contemporaries collaborated to bring out the works of art on the classical stage. In 2016, he received the prestigious Raman Magsaysay Award in recognition of his forceful commitment as an artist and advocate of art's power to heal India's deep social divisions. And in 2017, he also received the Indira Gandhi National Integration Award as well as the Professor P. Aravindakshan Memorial Award for connecting Carnatic music with common man. Once again, Mr. T. M. Krishna, we are grateful to have you with us today. Without further ado, I now request you to address your.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anushka, very much. And thank you, Pankaj. Thank you all for inviting me for this session. I'm not going to show you that I'm going to say anything new or anything you already don't know. But I'm going to speak from fundamentally my own struggles and my own ways of trying to understand issues of art, art practice, the very existence of art itself, and its relationship with ourselves individually and as multiple collectives. And everything that I have sought to explore has in some way looked at these aspects in diverse artistic terms. You know, the reason I titled the talk, or the short talk, I call it, the Aesthetics of Discrimination, is I often feel that in the discussions on art, on society, we ignore the power of the senses. We ignore that fundamentally we are beings who feel, who experience. The experience generates a feeling. I'm not going to say emotion, I'm going to be fluid in this context, feeling, which then develops into impressions. Now, these impressions are, of course, the product of our environment, of our personal environment, and a larger environment. But this flow of knowledge, again, we don't categorize it as knowledge, but this flow of knowledge, which is emotional knowledge, is what governs almost every act of ours, every thought of ours. And even myself, with all my, I could read 100 books, you know, I could talk to you for 2 hours intellectually. But after that, what do I feel is a question I never ask. And I very strongly feel that the struggle that we have with art or with art's role in society is blocked the moment we discuss what do we actually feel. And I'm not categorizing people as being conservative or progressive, modern, all these categories. I think everyone does this. So sometimes I've struggled. I would have this wonderful discussion about discrimination in art and communities. But then finally when you look at colors and palettes and designs and senses of beauty, senses of what is music, for example. What is noise and what is music? I mean, it sounds like such an easy question for each of us to answer. But that's the whole problem. It's an answer that each of you will give for yourself. So then you have something that you've categorized as noise. right? So the question is, what has enabled you to make that judgment call? That's the question that intrigues me the most. When is something noise? When is something music? And what are the reasons for that framing that we do individually and collectively? We do it in both categories, right? So if we come from a certain section of society, certain sounds become music, certain designs are, certain colors are acceptable. Fluorescent big houses are ugly. Now, why do I say that? Why do I say that? Why is it ugly? Why do I feel it is ugly? And this is what is at the core of what I want to think about. And I'm just thinking about it in front of you. I am not here to say I have figured this out at all. I've figured nothing out. I'm here to think about this, and I constantly think about it. So it's intriguing, and you factor into all this the power structures of art that decide what is beautiful. You know, so you have the marketplace that's also playing its role. I like to call ourselves Fab India Indians nowadays, because everybody loves Fab India designs and Fab India colors, and think of it as a palette. That's considered aesthetic India, and I think that's absolutely oppressive as a conceptual notion. It's very oppressive. All our houses look the same. I mean, I'm sure this room pretty much would nail it, more or less. Why? So when we go seeking this path, so that's selective seeking, isn't it? We're seeking something. So this entire operation that is considered a modern operation of questioning and finding oneself is an operation of reiteration of something that a group of powerful people have decided is beautiful. And then we use that word aesthetic so loosely when we're actually talking about preferences. So, when I said aesthetics of discrimination, so when I said the aesthetics of discrimination, I think the very structuring of the notion of aesthetics, both in its loose usage and, say, in its technical usage, needs to be investigated very carefully. You know? And this hit me once. So, it's happened to me. I've said this in many talks. There have been musical forms that I heard as noise, and now they move me deeply. Now, what happened between then and now that noise became music? It's like magic, isn't it? The music is the same. They have not changed it for my sake and made it acceptable to my palate. No. So what happened here? That's the fascinating aspect of this conversation. So so let's investigate this question, aesthetics. What does that word actually mean? The judgment of aesthetics I will come to. So when I say use that word, what does that mean? I mean, you can go to the etymology of the word and all the tikos that are there in the Greek words and what they mean. We can discuss all that ad nauseum. But aesthetics, I think I should look at two aspects. One aspect, fundamentally, is a word I use a lot, and I'd like to use is intentionality. So, say you're building a home, a house, where you're going to live with your family. The intention of that building is to create an environment of a home. And the environment of home includes the relationships, the intimacy, the conversation, the food, everything. Right? Now, if that intention of that object, which is the house, is not, shall we say, achieved, you can make this most beautiful looking house, but it is unaesthetic. So we have to connect aesthetics very directly to the intention of the body or the object that is being created. If you make a chair, the chair must be a place where I can sit comfortably. Okay? Now, on top of that notion of intention is what else can you build into it to create an environment that further imbues conversation, relationship, etc., right? So, let's not get confused with, so aesthetic is actually a study of form, It's a study of intention, it's a study of purpose, and it's a study of context. Mukesh Ambani's house is the most unaesthetic house you can ever build. Not because it's visually ugly, because it disrespects the environment where it is built. It is insensitive to the people who are living right behind and struggling for the next meal. And that's why it's unaesthetic, not because it's 24 floors and I think it looks ugly. So if we separate these two notions of your preferences and my preferences, which comes from our habituations, to aesthetics, then we are discussing two different ideas. Now, but what do? We conflate preference, habituation, into the notion of aesthetics. And aesthetics itself becomes the body of discrimination. So, therefore, beauty is actually at the core of our discussion. What is beauty? We can start from the body, from the face, from color, everything, all these notions of beauty. Right? What are we actually are we observing? Are we really looking at anything when we look at something? Or are we just looking at ourselves and reconfirming ourselves? So is there an ability to see in an aesthetic manner, but not in a preference manner? I'm not saying you have to shed your preferences. It's not going to happen all our lives. We're going to be that. But can we allow it to at least take a back seat? So then we can see art. Then we can see the art object. Then we can talk about activism. Otherwise, activism is a shallow political play. And I engage in it, so I know it. I'll be as unforgiving of myself as I'll be of everybody else. And I know the days when it is just political play. I know the days when it is not, and when something meaningful happens. So, when we discuss art, activism, change and all that, we have to foundationally accept that as people, we are unable to actually see, listen, in a manner that allows us to even discuss art. And then we are talking about art as being some way of changing something, right? So, I think we have to start somewhere at this very, very foundation, this very, very basic level. Now, then we come to art. Why do we have art in this world? Very, very basic. But why do we need art? Is it just a freedom? We love to use the expression freedom of expression. We use it again very easily. But why did this art is not a creation of nature? Let's be very clear. I always say the nightingale never says it sings. You and I say the nightingale sings. You and I say it sounds pretty, and you and I say the crow sounds ugly. Let's also not forget that. Right? So it is us. It's not there in nature. So why? Why did we do this as a species? I would like to believe, and I do believe, that right from the moment that the cave person scribbled some design on a wall, they were not replicating what they saw, but they were expressing what was felt. And which automatically means that the literal event of seeing, say, a lion or a tiger transforms the possibility of it being beyond that event, but the experience of the tiger or lion or the deer or the elephant. So it is not bound by that time event context. That's the magic of art. That it allows you to take the experience, abstract it, either visually or in tone or in rhythm, and allow it to exist. Now this is the idea. But art never exists like this, does it? We have built scaffoldings after scaffoldings, after limitations, to make sure it is not that. Make sure there is one control group, make sure there is one non-control group, make sure, decide who should come in, who should go out. We have framed all this. So within all this, we are trying to now find art somewhere. And by accident, sometimes art by itself does something to us. Right? Now, in such a scenario, What is the relationship between art and activism? First of all, activism is not some portfolio. We keep talking about as if it's like CEO title or CFO title, right? I mean, every active citizen is an activist. That's all, as far as I'm concerned. If you're an active citizen, you're an activist. Now, I would say that art in its real sense is naturally an active being. It's in its natural sense, in that ideal objective which I described when it is abstracted from something. But that really doesn't happen because we are all bound by the conditions through which we grew up, and through the environment that has told us good, right, beautiful, etc., etc., etc. So in this environment, what does it mean to actually connect art and activism? Before I get there, there was an interesting statement in that note you sent me, which I have to address before I go on. And I found the two words again very interesting. Using creative expression in this way is empowering, but it also requires the artist to be disruptive without being abrasive. Now, I found that extremely intriguing. Who decides what is abrasive and what is disruptive? Who is taking that call? I have been told I'm abrasive just by me singing something. So, can you be actually disruptive without being abrasive? I'm just going to throw that thought out there and let you ponder over it because I found it a very interesting structure to think about. So, what does it mean as an artist to me to engage in this very limited, knowing very well how limited I am, in a kind of activism with art? So, the first thing is for me to recognize is that my sense of beauty itself is fundamentally flawed. Now, does that mean that the music that I sing is not beautiful? You could ask that question, right? Does that mean that it's completely a fake, just a creation of one community or two communities together, reiterated over hundreds of years, and finally you and I say it's beautiful? So, I'll give you an actual example of what happened with me. So, one of my early investigations were actually about the history of Carnatic music. I was curious about treatises from Natya Shastra to Brihadeshi, and I spent a decent amount of time with these treatises with the help of scholars. And we started this project to try to reconstruct musical notations from a 100-year-old text. It's ragas that I know today. I sing out of reflex. I've been singing it all my life. And we took this old book, and this person had notated it, one of the earliest detailed notations. And we reconstructed it. And the first thing that struck me was, this sounds so horrible. Now, that's a very intriguing position to be in. This is a raga I sing today. I think that it's quintessential Carnatic music. We celebrate it as being so gorgeous. 100 years ago, somebody has notated in a manner which sounds ugly to me, horrible to me. So it was almost an existential crisis for me at that moment. So is the sense of beauty just transient? That a certain time frame determines it's beautiful? Or is there really, because we talk about history, we talk about our music being so many 100 years old, and, we name some people who have sung some 400 years ago and say we are continuing this tradition. What tradition am I continuing? What am I continuing? Am I really continuing something? If so, when I call that ugly, what does it say about myself? And this was just an inquiry within one art form, by the way, practiced by similar people socially. So, that was my first trigger of this whole notion of how am I habituated to believe in a certain experience. So I really think that the first things that I do as an artist, after that, slowly I began, and I still try, is to it's also a very selfish journey, and let me tell you that there is a certain self-centeredness in this also, because you are trying to grapple with yourself. So the first thing is, how uncomfortable can I make myself with what I'm doing? It was a very, very simple question. So what are all the things that I depend on so deeply that I believe is what gives me the identity of being a Carnatic musician, for example. And that automatically leads to the question, what is Carnatic music? Are all these dependencies Carnatic music? Or will the music exist if I throw these dependencies? Is there that continuum that we dream about? You know, I am not even extending this conversation beyond the circle of Carnatic music at this moment. We are still within this very, very elite and privileged world. But even there, so the first things that I found that I could deal with was breaking all the structures that I depended on to confirm my own identity. And I stood back and said, does Carnatic music still exist? And I'm very happy to say it did exist. I would have been absolutely shattered if it had not. So the question was, why have we built all these things? All the things that prevent that abstractive experience of the art form. We have built it because we are as a species people of power, people of control. And depending on which section of society, in which part you are, you create the structure, you enable a certain narrative, and you confirm a certain sense of beauty. And you very vociferously also tell the rest of society, this is it. Get closer to me, you're better off. You're further from me, you're uglier. Very simple. I've said it in a linear manner, but you know there are lines and shades. So so therefore, that was my first basic inquiry, right? And from there is when I discovered this notion of aesthetic intentionality. That even if to my ear, for example, that music which I heard reconstructed from 100 years ago was ugly, it's still ugly, by the way. It's still ugly to my ear. That's not gone. The experience doesn't go away, mind you. You just know what is happening when you experience it. That's the difference. I still would say it is absolutely aesthetic because I saw the structure and the purpose and the form that it was created. My environment told me it's ugly. Right? And I can tell you, after singing it for I've been doing this project for what, maybe 2006, 15 years. I found that sound beautiful. I was able to live in both sounds. It didn't bother me at all. I was able to find something in that through experience that I never could find before. So there's something that broke down, and I think one of the things is notion of oral. So when we discuss activism, activism is not an out there thing. You're not there to change the world. You're there to remain active and remain conscious. You're not there to change the world. So when art becomes activism, the first thing it does is, can you as an artist break down every system that you depend on? That's the question you should be asking. Can I be as vulnerable as possible? And when you are vulnerable, you receive in a manner you've never received before. That's where activism lives. Then every act you do from then on, everything that you engage in from then on, becomes an opening through which you learn. Now, this is also, let me place another problem in this discourse, is the fact that I come from such privilege. I mean, I come from privilege of gender, privilege of class, privilege of economy, privilege of caste, privilege of language, name it all. So, where does that place me in having this discussion, right? Because my art form is never going to be thrown to the dustbin as saying it's not worth it. It's very interesting, right? So, you're talking about what sounds, our judgments. People may say in North India that they don't like Carnatic music because it's really horrible to the ear. They will never say Carnatic music is useless. Nobody will ever say that. Nobody from South India will say Khayal is big. I don't like it, but you've got great art form. Doesn't know anything about the art form. So what decided that it was great? Only society decided it was great. Nobody else decided. But you will do that in a jiffy of an art form that remains in the fringes of this world, of this society. So imagine the practitioner of those art forms. What does beauty mean there? What are the struggles of beauty that are happening there? And when I talk about this great self-realization, I mean, can we even have this discourse in that context? Does it even make sense? Isn't this discourse also privileged? That I have the time to look at a treatise and then tell you I realize some beauty from there. I mean, because I've confirmed who I am. I've confirmed that I'm practicing a great art form. That's never a question. I'm confirmed that I'm a person who needs to be respected simply because of who I am. Now shift the whole scene to an individual who's not given the basic respect of being a human being. I'm not going. Economy will come to later. Who's lived in a social structure that has antagonized everything that they represent, that has thrown into the dustbin their notions of beauty, their songs, their dances, or you're probably only appropriated or exploited them at some point of time. Now, what is activism mean to that person? I know this talk seems to be going all over the place, but that's fine. I'm a very unstructured person, so I think you'll have to bear with that. But that is the issue, right? That there is no universal discourse on this. There can't be a universal discourse. So what does activism mean to that person? What does that finding mean to that person? There's a difference between me saying I make myself vulnerable and an artist who is marginalized should not make himself or herself vulnerable. Or vulnerability needs to be a different notion there. It needs to be understood with a different idea. It's an utter mess, this whole discussion. It actually is. Because how does one place activism now? How does one place art now? How do we say art's role? The only thing we can say is art has that possibility of giving you an experience that makes you pause, make you question. I'm intellectualizing it, of course. But beyond that, its existence is far more complex. Now, there's a couple of other things I'll say before I stop, is that you always find that, look at the nature of content. Again, we're talking about the aesthetic content, be it musical, visual, body, use of body. You can almost universally categorize these elements depending on where the art comes from. The sense of body almost changes as you go up the societal ladder. The sense of sound changes. The sense of language changes. That's why I said abrasive needs to be used very carefully. Because a lot of music, for example, is rap music abrasive? Let's ask that question straight. Rap music is frontal, at your face, uses four-letter words every third word, calls out discrimination directly. Is it abrasive or is it challenging? Is it questioning? What is it? What is it? There was actually this happened. There's an art form called Ghana music it's actually born out of the city of Chennai. And Ghana music is very similar to rap. Actually, most of the art forms that belong to Dalit communities that are marginalized, are very frontal in their content because it also describes the environment. Whether it is frontal in every sense, it's about the struggles of their lives, it's about the celebrations of their lives, it's everything. Everything is right out there to see. The fact is that the sense of community is something that is far more real in marginalized society because that's their safety literally depends on that sense of community and holding together. And you see that in the art forms that come from this. So there was this Ghana singer who actually sang a song attacking Jayalalitha, who was then Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. And he was, I think, put into jail the next day or something like that, as you would expect in this country. And I remember many people saying, artists are allowed to say, but we can't say these things. So it was very interesting. So I actually went to listen to the song, and I was talking to a friend of mine. And then at that time, I didn't know as much about Ghana as I know a little bit more today, not too much, a little bit more. And this discussion on aesthetics came up. And he said, anybody who listens to Ghana would know this is the aesthetics of Ghana. That you do call things out like this in Ghana. In Ghana, you say it bluntly. right? You say it as the person feels it. And the dialect uses it, the dialect allows it. So, beyond the fact that it's the politics of the political, Indian political issues, there is also the idea that there is aesthetics of how certain things are said, certain things are sound. I always think, for example, political music and religious music are the same. And this is an aesthetic observation, I'll tell you. All political songs and all religious bhajan kind of songs, or qawwali or gospel, will have simple tunes that everybody can sing. The tunes will be repeated again and again and again and again and again with different lyrics. Highlights will be on certain words that need to be highlighted. Whether it's Rama or whether it's a political figure, it doesn't make a difference because the objective is the same. Now, that's the aesthetics of the form. And that's because of where they belong, how they belong. And it's also activism. It is also active. So activism is also a default happening in some ways. Now the question we are actually asking is there honesty in it? Is actually what we're asking in this whole discussion. Because anything is active. The moment you sing, the moment you move, it's active. And it is communicating something. Now, if I keep singing religious songs, it is activism of a certain sort. But what we are asking is it honest? One. We're also asking, is it othering? We're also asking, does it respect what we have come to believe in a modern world, in a democracy, as being something that sees the larger palette of humanity? That is actually our discussion. And that's the question we should ask of every art form. Right? So there is intentionality and there is this larger democratic sense, that sensibility that we are seeking. And that's the question. Whether it comes through just the singing of an alap, whether it comes through the words, it can be overt, it can be very soft, and you may not detect. It can be in many ways. There's not just one way of doing it. It also depends on the form itself. Certain forms enable a certain kind of dialogue, certain forms enable a different kind of dialogue. So, the aesthetics of the form enables its discourse. The aesthetics of the form, if separated from judgment and perception, also enables the question. But we have trapped the sense of aesthetics into a model of discrimination. We have decided that certain modes of rendition, certain modes of sounds are automatically placed that in a cradle of comfort. And activism from that cradle is seen differently as activism from something that belongs outside that cradle. There is also the fact that certain art forms that are the top tier of society don't believe that they need to engage with these larger questions at all. Why? So just about on the 14th of April, Therman Murugan and I released a little song in Tamil on Ambedkar. Now, it's the first time, let alone the personality, the word Ambedkar has ever appeared in the palette of Carnatic. I'm sure it's still not appeared in Khayal or anything else. Now, it was the first time, and it was done in a certain poetic method, and I won't go into the details. This is one interesting discussion that came up somewhere in social media about why Carnatic music should not be used for such things. It's a very fascinating discussion, saying that the power of the discourse gets diluted. Now, if you actually dig deeper into somebody's saying that, they've done two things. They've said that certain discourses must have only a certain tone. Right? Now, what are they saying about the tone? Let's go one step further. They are saying that tone belongs to only certain sections of society. They are saying that section of society has the melodic and rhythmic tone to talk about this. You're fundamentally saying Ambedkar belongs only to Dalits. Is what you're saying. Now, what I'm arguing is there a new tonality to Ambedkar within the sound of Carnatic? Not in any way to appropriate Ambedkar, but to find a resonance of that personality, and not just the person, but the idea that is Ambedkar in a larger pattern. This is also a fence work. Where is that line that I need to draw? It's defense work. Of course it's defense work. Right? So, similarly, if you look at, now there's also a parallel struggle I'll end with this, with art forms that are marginalized, is the other voice of questioning. They have always been the voice of questioning far more than what we've ever done in our lives. But also the problem is that in order for them to get any acceptability in the world of art, they're expected to look, sound closer to what we are. Right? So there is this, so as much as we say that certain art forms are protest art, for example, you know, or like you said in the write-up, certain art forms are political and protest. We don't respect them still. So what we are also seeking is that word called respect. Right? Where is respect in activism? So what kind of activism is respected? What kind of activism is needed? What kind of activism is art? These three could be very different things in our head. We participate in something because we see the need of that voice in, shall we say, enlarging the conversation. Doesn't mean I respect the sound I heard. Right? So we're also battling space here. What spaces do art forms occupy? Does the space determine the kind of activism that is acceptable? Is it going to decide what kind of activism is sung in some fashion or is not sung? How are we making these decisions? Right? So we have to see this larger set of questions, and I've thrown as many as came in my head today onto you in this conversation. We can discuss every one of this for hours, actually. And I do hope we don't find answers, because I'm really scared of answers. I feel that the moment I found some answer, there's definitely a problem in what I'm saying. But I think this is what we are trying to grapple with. So I'd like to end with one last point, saying that I'm not saying at any point that every art form does not have an aesthetic sonic sense or aesthetic body. They do. But I think that what we are trying to protect most of the times is not that. And what we even appreciate as being art is not really the art. And that's where the danger begins. That we are actually appreciating something else. I'm not judging it as right or wrong. I'm saying, can we recognize it in this conversation? So when we, in our own cultural circle, when we are doing this, what will we do with every other cultural circle? And parallelly, you have people inhabiting the multiple cultural circles who are stuck. At the same time, the voices that are empowering questioning, while the privileged don't think it's necessary. And those are the voices at the same time are told, get closer to me for respect. Look at that struggle. This is what art and activism best is. And I'll leave it right here now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krishna, for your very vivid thoughts on and questions like why is something aesthetical to you? How much can you leave behind your privilege and your preference to accept somebody else's aesthetical palette? And what is the extent of honesty and discrimination in an aesthetical palette? These are some of the questions that I think I'm asking myself, and I'm sure all of us will want to respond. So thank you once again, sir. We're very privileged on this side. Now I take the opportunity to open the floor for the audience to pose some questions to a speaker. But before we do recognize questions from the participants, sir, allow me to begin this interactive round with a question of my own.
Go ahead.
So you know, sir, they say that music is a universal language. But
Stop. It's rubbish. Go on. That's utter rubbish.
If we assume for a moment that that's what is the socially acceptable, it's palette, it's something that becomes fringe of society, like you say. With such diversity in individuality and context as you have highlighted, how can, I think this is the more generic question, how can an artist or a musical artist in this context make their art available to as many people as possible? And to add on to that, do you feel that as an artist, this encouragement to make your art available to as many people as possible is the scaffolding that you talk about? It is the limitation to us being able to take the abstract out of the limitation.
I mean, first, why did I say that art is universal? The rubbish statement. And because what does that even mean? Just all of you just pause for 2 minutes and think about it for yourself. It means that somebody is living in some village and somewhere in New Zealand will say aha to a raga that he sings. What does it mean? What does it really mean? Now, the question is, can music, if you're going to reframe it a little, and say, is it possible for somebody in a completely distant culture to be touched, say, by some music? Of course it is possible. Of course it is possible. Nobody is denying that possibility. But doesn't make music a universal being. It does not make that. It's musics of the world. Right? So when we say, so then we ask this question. So what is it that touched that person? Let's again dig a little deeper into it, right? It is the fact that something in what the individual heard, and the individual is an active participant in that experience. Also, don't forget, the individual is participating in being touched. It's not just the singer, right? So in that participation, what happened? In that participation, the cultural scaffoldings disappeared, even if momentarily, and something abstractive communicated. That's what it means. Now, this can happen to you in any context, right? It can happen in the mountains. That's the example I always give. I walk in the mountains. 15 people walk in the mountains. Somebody who lived in the desert who's never seen something else can be as touched by something else. So that's a possibility, and that is the possibility of openness of the human nature that sound can enable. But music itself then doesn't become universal language. It's still a limiting language unless we want to free ourselves and free it. So the universality is in this abstractive enabling that the individual or the artist wants to do. And I also have a problem if it happens only accidentally, which means it happens in spite of you. That doesn't work for me. Right? One. Now, this other notion that you question of reaching as many people, I'm somehow not so interested in that. I'm more interested if there are only 50 people listening to me sing. My interest is, can those 50 people be from diverse sections of society? That interests me much more than a lakh people listening to me who are the same, or who are not going to engage actively in what is happening. It doesn't interest me, and I'm making this observation very personally, and I don't expect other people to feel the same. It doesn't. So to me, and the question, many times I've also said this. You spoke of the scaffolding. Many people say that Hindustani music is so difficult, Carnatic music is so difficult. These art forms are only for some people. All this rubbish we've heard all our lives. I have now almost come to this point where I feel actually it's nothing to do with the music. It's the people who are difficult. The music is actually not difficult. We have built so many narratives around it, both in its sound, in the way we talk about it, in the way we learn, in the way we say it should be learned, it should be heard, what you should do. So that is a socially constructed environment. So, like I said, the experience of a sound is not just sound in you. The sound reaches you through so much. So it reaches you through all these narratives. By the time it reaches somebody who belongs to outside this world, it is a scary piece of sound. It's scary, it is ugly, it is something unreachable, etc., etc. But is it the sound or is it all of us? I'm more and more convinced it's not the sound, it's us. Just take all this out and maybe the sound will actually reach more. And the inverse happens to an art form that is marginalized, right? Again, there are negative narratives that are built, again by the powerful around it so much, that we actually can never hear it. So when I spoke about that moment when noise became music for me, the negative impression list that did not allow me to listen, just dissolve. Then I actually listen. That's fascinating.
Absolutely. Thank you so much once again, Mr. Krishna, for addressing that question so vividly and beautifully. I think we have 3 questions. Sir, would you like to take all of them together, or should we have them one by one?
I'll take them one by one. It's easier. I mean, unless they're connected, you can connect them.
All right. I think we'll take Hiranya Bhargavi's question first. Please go ahead. You can unmute yourself. You can type your question down in the chat.
Good evening, sir. Actually, first of all, I was very fascinated by many of your ideas, and especially the one where you said that we need to be vulnerable. Actually, breaking cobwebs or, being socially sensitive is a lot more about being vulnerable than about anything else, and self-exploration. But my question then is that, like your initiatives or any radical initiative, in the sense that where the people on the margins are, they are trying, when you try to hear them, when you try to give a recognition to their art forms, the question comes that when we listen to these elitist art forms like Carnatic or Hindustani music, some words or some tunes of almost every bandish tricks us, because it hurts our 21st century's sensibilities. And then this question comes of inclusion of various communities. Then where do these art forms stand, the elitist ones? Because these art forms actually are a document of the biases of the elitist communities, which have given rise to such sensibilities in these art forms. So, do they need to be reformed, or do they need to be, how can we go about it? Shall we reform the very core of the songs or the systems of music, or shall we give rise to a new thing? How can we go about it? Because those sensibilities are, those aesthetic sensibilities are at the very core of these systems, I think.
Okay, you've asked me about 40 questions in one question, so I'm going to answer about 2 of them. Okay? But I want to tell you, Hiranya, very, very important observations, and I wish we had the time to address all the things you brought up. But you asked one fundamental question. That word inclusion is also something we should be careful. I prefer to say inclusion is a state where there is no exclusion. That's it. Because inclusion by itself also sometimes, who are you to include? I mean, is somebody asking you to include? There's so many things you can ask about. So, can we create an environment where there's no exclusion? Is what inclusion is for me. Now, your question that many of the elite art forms are embedded in things that are discriminative and that are, shall we say, because they are usually emblematic of the community that holds it. And that's true of all these, I'm going to say, so-called classical art forms. You'll find the same thing happening in Western classical music, in any other form you say, because it comes from socially powerful people, culturally powerful people. I'm not justifying it, I'm just placing it in context. So, now the question that each one needs to ask themselves is, what is this core of the art form? That's the question. Right? Is the core of the art form all this or not? Now, if you ask me what is the core of Carnatic music, and I will say to a large extent in Hindustani music, I'll say there are only 3 elements to it. There's raga, there is tala, and there's text. Okay? Everything else, to me, is superficial. Now, text can be anything, as far as I'm concerned. And text can be linguistic and non-linguistic. Tadha, di is also text. Right? Raga is a melodic abstract idea. Tala/laya is the notion of time in a framework. To me, this is the basis of this music. Everything else, honestly, doesn't do anything extra to this music. So then, can we rediscover it, keeping this in mind as my work was? So whether it is, I'll tell you in what ways I have tried. Very direct way is changing the content. You have brought this whole notion of certain words that pop up, right? So can we bring new content? Can we talk about things that we don't usually talk about? Now, Murugan and I together brought a song on Manuel's character on a Carnatic stage, which I actually sang in what is one of the most Brahminical religious spaces. That creates an interest. And next song was the Agaraja song extolling Rama. It creates an interesting discourse, right? So you can question the content. What about the form itself? Does the presentation itself emblematic of something? I mean, the presentation many times is also emblematic of gender discrimination. Let's also talk about that, right? The presentation of the art form, or sometimes what we think as being important for these art forms is also very masculine created notions. Demolishing that is possible. So it can be overt through language, it can be demolishing through soundscape. Then, like I said, space. Is there some rule that only these forms should be formed in certain spaces? Can we subvert that? So there are multiple possibilities. But we have to first convince ourselves, I'm not going to do it for you, of what you really believe the core of the form is. If you're going to say that those disturbing words and disturbing structures are the core of the form, then I will say throw the form. But I don't think they are the core of the form. That's my personal experience and my personal observation. So I think that's where you will find some direction to what we are looking at. And here I answered a question only specifically got to do with art forms that are part of the privileged pattern. The same discussion, if you're going to have for art forms that are in different societal spaces, we'll have to have it with a different kind of a framework.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krishna.
Thank you, sir. Excuse me. Thank you, sir. I would like to say that you answered the questions that I didn't even ask, and they were subtle questions. So thanks a lot. And also, I completely agree to your point, especially the inclusion. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sudhanya. Thank you, Mr. Krishna. Now we have another question from Pavitra, and after that we'll be taking one more question from Anushka before we wrap the session for the day. Pavitra, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Anushka. Good afternoon, sir. So when you mentioned the similarities between politics and religion, it really got me thinking, and I was wondering if you would agree that the aesthetics of politics, religion, and protest are somewhat similar because these things are very populist.
Sorry, aesthetics of what did we say? I lost you there.
Aesthetics of politics, protest, and religion, because these are very populistic. They draw on reaching as many people and influencing as many people as they can in one go. So do you agree with that?
Well, if you're talking about in terms of its aesthetics in how art is used in all of them, I would entirely agree. Because the objective is similar, right? It's participatory. You want more people to participate. You want more people to also, shall we say, agree with that ideology. Okay, the ideology could be faith, could be resistance, could be also direct politics, what we call party politics. Yes, so therefore that's what I said, the aesthetics that are formed in art forms that do this, or art forms that, shall we say, adapt for this medium, are very similar. You can go across the globe and you'll find them. They're very similar. Because they want more people to sing the song, they want certain names to be chanted again. If you just look at even chant, the idea of the chant, it's very similar, right? I'm not making any ethical judgment here, but whether you chant the name of a dictator, or you chant a phrase of protest, or you chant, say, the name of a god, the intention behind this is the same. Like I said, I'm not making an ethical judgment here, so don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying that, therefore, it'll be catchy, it'll be simple, it'll be something you can never forget. So, yes, the rhythm structures too, you will find similarity. If you look at the kind of rhythmic structures that are used in these multiple forms, you will find it. So I would agree that, yes, in aesthetic sense, they are similar because their objective is quite similar, actually.
Thank you so much, sir.
Right, thank you so much, Mr. Krishna. And we'll be taking our final question from Anushka. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir, for taking my question. I would like to begin by complimenting you and thanking you for your talk. There's something you said about it going all over the place. I think that was the most wonderful part of it, the diversity, the fact that you made our thoughts be pushed and pulled in all kinds of directions. It even got confusing at times. I think that happening was very important, especially with this theme in this fest, and I would like to thank you for that. My question is that you also said something about artists. It is very important for an artist to break their dependencies. On the systems that they depend on. Now, when that happens, if an artist is able to achieve that, are those dependencies replaced by others? Are there other systems, other things one starts to depend on, or is the goal to be completely independent?
So this is probably a fundamentally philosophical question about freedom in many ways, right? You're asking a question, you could ask a question about anything you do in life, not just music or art, because structures is something we all depend on. Now,
maybe you can answer it in your context, sir.
Yeah, I'll answer it now. I will try to answer it or address it in most contexts because I don't see it as very different in the art context. Are we ever going to be free of some dependency or not? First question. Probably never. But can we always be in a state of awareness that we are dependent? Yes, we can. So, shackling dependencies is first being honest about it. And also, in some cases, dependency itself may be an othering mechanism, an oppressive mechanism, in which case it becomes ethically necessary to do it, without, for me at least, without a doubt. Then, suppose it's replaced by some other dependency. The question is, can I be completely aware that I'm dependent? Because I think sometimes when you're just absolutely aware of exactly what's going on, it's possible the dependency kind of vanishes. The dependency becomes harder when you either ignore it or believe that's how it is going to be or don't even know it exists. A classic analogy for this is when people say we never discuss caste in our house to prove that they have no sense of discrimination. Right? This is a classic case, right? The fact that they depend on caste to not discuss caste is something that never comes to them. Right? But if that first step is done, then maybe, or like when a man says, constantly says, I'm a feminist, without actually, how problematic that can be, right? So I would rather say that can we always be aware that we are going to be dependent? And can we be aware of the kind of dependencies that we have? And I think that itself is a freedom. That awareness is a freedom. I'm not going to claim that we can attain a kind of freedom which is absolute. I don't know, maybe it exists and maybe there are people who have been able to do it. I am not going to talk about it because I don't know about it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for answering my question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krishna. I feel responsible now that you're here, and I see this message in the chat box from Vicky. I think I'll take 5 more minutes of your time and have you answer the question.
Sure, go ahead.
So the question is that, music as an art form is more equitable, however you interpret that word, in comparison to other forms such as literature or visual art. So do you think that music is a more potent tool for dissent in comparison to other arts?
Who asked this question?
This is from Nidhi.
So I want to know from Nidhi why she feels music is more equitable, because I'm fascinated by that observation. Can she answer that question? Why does she feel music is more equitable?
Sir, I think because I'm a literature student, so if literature, there is prerequisite that you should be literate, and for visual arts also, and also the dissemination of music is more we have folk music. There are so many prerequisites for other art forms. I don't think we require all the Carnatic and Hindustani music is sophisticated and require training, years of training. But so this again, we are creating this dichotomy between folk music but I think in a lot of aspects, music, because we had protests. We have been having protests since 2019 in our country. Like before that, we had a session on poetry, such as Faiz Ahmed Faiz made that that poem. Yeah, it made quite a furore. So like in most of the protests, like in my campus also, we use poetry of fairs, Parsh, and visual arts and films and literature we discuss, and it's just like it becomes a like we are just writing papers on it. Who are reading those papers? Just we, just this whole group we discuss, we read, we write papers, and it just remains limited, to these people in ivory towers, and it is not, disseminated, or it's not so, and not everybody can, write a novel and win a Booker Prize, but like now, like folk literature and folk art are also, like people are recognizing.
So in a way, you kind of contradict your question and answered your question in a very, very interesting way. If this is recorded, I want you to listen to what you said, because the answer to your question is kind of hidden in what you said. If you listen carefully. First, I would like to say that all art forms are sophisticated in the way they need to be sophisticated in their environment. Okay? So sophistication is not special to Khayal or Dhrupad or Carnatic music. Again, sophistication is an intra-art form observation. So within Carnatic music, I can discuss sophistication. Within Khayal, you can discuss sophistication. You can't discuss sophistication between Carnatic and Khayal. It's a ridiculous discussion. Okay? So if you watch Lavani, there is sophistication in Lavani. If you are within the culture of Lavani, you know what is sophisticated Lavani and what is unsophisticated Lavani. From sitting outside it, we can't say Lavani is less sophisticated than Bharatanatyam. Sorry, not possible. Right? So, first that observation. Then I think in a way you addressed your own question. You said that you sit in academic circles and 10 people are listening to your discussions. That's exactly where classical music of India also is, right? We sit in our ivory towers and there are about 100 people listening to my concert. Or maybe 1,000 people maximum. So in a way, your highbrow literature world and the highbrow Carnatic and Hindustani world are the same world. It's just a different group of people. That's all. Okay. Now you also said something else. You said, but now there is other literature people are listening. So you do also recognize that, like in literature or music, there are multiple other forms that other people are also listening. So all I'm saying is that music is not any way more equitable or less equitable. It's the same in its own way. Whether it's literature, whether it is music, whether it is dance, whether it is theatre, it depends on how we view these different spaces. And what I would like to call the flux that can happen between these spaces. And can we create a certain blurring of these spaces? For example, what is known as, like I would question why Carnatic or Hindustani is considered sophisticated art, for example. You should be questioning why only certain literature is considered sophisticated. Are there different kinds of sophistication? Right? That would be the interesting conversations for us to have. So I think in a way you actually answered your own question by pointing to different literatures and music. So I don't think music is extra equitable or less equitable. I think it is society that actually determines the sense of equity that happens in aesthetic forms.
Thank you, sir. Like I really understood the point of sophistication that you mentioned. But I'm confused. Like if we talk about dissemination, of the art, so dissemination of music is more widespread.
So that's a technology issue, right? If you look at it that way, that's because of the nature of the form. I mean, it's an oral form. You can record it and you put it online, etc. Whereas now you could, for example, say in another 15 years, everybody are only listening to audiobooks. Let's hypothesize about this. Then what happens? Say reading is not a necessity. Suppose, right? So there is also the fact that you're comparing music with a form that has a different medium of communication. And today's technology allows us to kind of. But let me put another spoke in that wheel also. Just because PM Krishna puts out a video on YouTube, you think that everyone in the world is going to watch it? No. only those who are within the world of PM Krishna are going to watch it. So the same problem starts there also. So if PM Krishna wants this conversation of his music to reach the larger world, then he has to break the structures of limitations that are placed that are not allowing this to go through. So the same struggles that I'll have in the real world, I also have in the virtual world. Let's flip it. Say there is an art form, folk art form. He puts a live on his Facebook page. Who's going to be watching? Just because in Facebook you and I may not even know that the page exists. We don't know that individual, right? So even there are these same boundaries that happen. But the nature of sound being something that can travel in a certain manner does mean that it has a different kind of journey vis-a-vis the ritual world. That I would agree.
Thank you, sir. It was a very insightful discussion. I'm really
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much again, Mr. Krishna. Our faculty members from the college, Professor Pankaj and Professor Sonali ma'am. They also have some questions, so if you have some more time.
Sure,
only if you have some time.
No problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, I just wanted to hear you a little more on this whole question of aesthetics, its constituted and constitutive character, and the process of meaning making. Because as it happens in verbal communication, I think you would agree that meaning is produced through familiarity by juxtaposing different kinds of familiarity, and that's why nothing purely original will ever be meaningful. Now, if that is the case, and I don't know if you agree with me over there, but if that is the case even broadly, then what does an existing form within music, within literature, within the structure of language, for that matter, verbal language, how does that form, the force of that form, put a limit on what it is that we can achieve in terms of communicating something original? In other words, how far can we gnaw at the frontiers of a form, whether it is the form of the music or the form of language or any other art form?
Well, I'm going to try and answer this. Of course, it's an intriguing question. First was your question on the aesthetics. If the first part was, can you just repeat that for me for a minute?
Actually, I just made an observation that, I like the fact that you emphasized on how the form of aesthetics itself is constituted. I mean,
yes, okay. Yes, okay.
And within that context, I then put...
So, I mean, very, very true. And meaning is what you said about meaning is very important, because we also tend to narrow meaning into a very semantic sense. Whereas meaning, say in music, is a sonic body entirely, where one element is the semantic body. So even, for example, even if I'm singing an alapana, there is meaning in that alapana. And the meaning can be meanings that are carrying the social environment, historical environment, the participants, the actual space of the event itself, all within the meaning of what is experienced. So the experience becomes the bundle of these meanings, right? Now, if you add to that the semantic itself for me is quite an interesting body. I would say language. Now, in certain art forms, I argue that the language itself becomes a body of sound, that the semantic dissolves. It almost becomes immaterial. But does that mean I can ignore it? I will come to that. So, for example, I would argue that in Carnatic music, and that's something I've been arguing for a long time, saying that there is a meaning in sound. I use a simple example. If I was going to sing Ra, Ma in 5 different tunes, is it the same Ra, Ma? It's a fascinating question. other than the picture of Rama that may appear, Ra and Ma become something. And within that, there is a definition that is being carried. And that's where the question of limits also start happening to fall in place. Now, the next question is language something, is meaning and language something that is added or constituted with the idea of sound, or is it the idea of sound itself? Okay, so when I say I'm singing Kalyani, what is Kalyani? Is it the sound also of the word or of the syllable along with just an oral movement of the melody, or is it together? Now, if I say it is together a body, then it again opens up another very interesting conversation of the aesthetic, embodied aesthetics of it, right? So the embodied aesthetics is then telling me the limits of the sonic syllable of the word both together. Now, let me say I want to subvert this. Okay? And this happened to me. That's why I can tell you from experience. Now, if you take Carnatic music, we sing fundamentally in Sanskrit, Telugu, Tamil, and Kannada, primarily. Now, if I was going to say in each language, how many words do we actually use in the composition? I'm sure you could do the same thing in Khayal. I mean, in each language, there are about 150 words in their derivatives that we keep singing again and again. So the entire sonic body of Carnatic music creates a limitation of linguistic sound also, which means there's a limit on meaning also, right? So the frontier has been determined in the meaning of sound and the meaning of language. Now, when I first started introducing ideas and language and dialects which were not part of these words that we are used to singing, it created a problem for me. I didn't know how to utter them. I didn't know how to, when I say utter, I mean musically, I didn't know how to sing it. Because I had no history for it. I had no habit for it. Right? So, I remember, even when I worked with Murugan or I worked with other languages, it was like how, there was discomfort. There was actually, I could feel this discomfort. Like I just was not, it was not the meaning of the word that was the only thing that was making me uncomfortable. It is just the sound of the word. I'm not used to Kalyani sounding in this form or Bhairavi sounding like this. So in a way, the frontier was being pushed at that moment. Now the question appears, is your question. Can that frontier be pushed? If I am pushing that frontier, am I then in a way demolishing that aesthetic body that has been already, shall we say, designed? Now that's the very difficult question, right? So that's the very difficult question to answer. My response is, as long as the aesthetics is able to bend with it, it still exists. Now, when the aesthetics is not able to bend with it, then you know that that word, just if it's a word or if it is not able to hold. There's another possibility, Pankaj, is that it may bend after some time. That I just need to sing it for 6 months every day. And then it moves. So one of the characteristics of this aesthetic intentionality is also that it's an expanding idea. And it is up to us to allow it to expand. Right? If we agree about its fundamentals, then everything else needs to be a movable semi-state. Now, the fact that I'm uncomfortable with it bending or moving does not mean it cannot bend. It means that I am unable to bend, actually. So, it has been, there's this song that I did. It was a song that was addressing environmental issue called the Poromboku Padam. Okay, and many people have heard it. It's on YouTube. The word Poromboku is an abuse word. I'll use a better example. It's even better. So, this song on manual scavenging that Murugan and I did. The first line is Nara Malam Allalama. So it is the individual who is doing manual scavenging is actually asking, can human hands, comes later, actually pick up stinking feces? That's the first line of a Carnatic song. Now Malam is feces, and it's a Sanskritized word. The very blunt Tamil word is tea, which is what you would call crude. Okay, if you ask anybody, did you shit this morning, it's considered unsophisticated. So it's similar if I ask somebody, did you go shit and come? So I remember talking to Murugan. I was just going to sing it for the first time on stage, and Murugan looked at me and said, I used malam, but actually the word is pee. Are you okay singing it? Now, why was he asking me that question? So, for example, can Bhairavi sound pee? What happens to the meaning of pee in Bhairavi? Now, how uncomfortable am I to bend it in that fashion? So, I think this, it's not really an answer, but I hope in some way addressed what you were inquiring.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Fascinating.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krishna. Thank you so much, Pankaj, for your question. Sonali ma'am, please ask your question and then we
Do we have time?
Yeah, sure, I can take a last one. No problem.
Okay, it's actually about the cultural context of aesthetic appreciation, where I am fully with you on that yes, for so many of the arts, we do need a kind of acculturation. But then I do still feel that art at certain moments, maybe of purity or I don't know what, that it resonates such that it does transcend acculturation, and one is a context which is in fact, from Carnatic music, of which I have very little, actually no knowledge at all. But this is an actual incident where quarter of a century ago, and it has still stayed with me, where in the hostel a young girl used to play a tape which used to be actually a band I liked, but because it was so frequently played, it was irritating every day to listen to the same tape. And one morning, she's singing in Carnatic tradition without being aware that she was singing. And that was so beautiful. I had absolutely no background or understanding of the music itself or the meanings of the words that she sang, but I was just, it has stayed with me 25 years later still. And that could also go for certain, like, there are other incidents too in different languages, different geographical regions, where you come across something which you are not accustomed to at all, but it resonates at a very deep level. And that's where I feel that is there something beyond simple learned acculturation process to something which is, which transcends, and there's something pristine in the art forms, not just in music, but across the different art forms?
Well, one, I don't think culturation is a learned process first. Culturation is an experiential process.
Yes.
No, it could be an unconscious process.
Yes.
Culturation, it could be unconsciously happening too, which you and I are not aware of. Now, I can't make an observation on your experience because it'd be unfair for me to pass judgment on it. But I will. But because what you have experienced, that's true to you, and I cannot judge it. But I can say two things. Like I said to somebody, now the possibility that something transcending touches you is, of course, a possibility, and it can happen in any context. It can happen in sound, it can happen in visual, and I don't think I'm denying that at any point in time. Now, having said that, there are multiple questions that can be raised. Are we so sure that it was not triggering any layer of impression that was there in your mind? You and I don't know. So, we could ask that question, but we don't know. But let's even say that it is completely alien and there is absolutely no reference in your mind, which I personally think is probably not happening, but let's say it will happen that way. Now, even if you take that into consideration, the enabling question is this one. Fine, you're touched for that moment. But unless, post that moment, there is a possibility of unconscious or conscious culturation of some fashion, that moment does not in any way transcend to something else in the individual. That is, that. Sorry. So the individual of art enabling something in the individual. The experience remains as that experience. And sometimes you can even, experience remains whatever it is for you. For example, in 25 years, it remains something that's touch a chord, which you don't have a word to describe, which is why it is touched a chord. But yet, if there is no process seems like a very hard word here, but if there's no way by which it becomes a reflective process of culturation in some manner, that is in no way that has expanded the horizon of the experience. That is what I would argue, not in any way debunking the experience itself or saying that it's not true, because it's true. I mean, every one of us have gone through those things, and it's true, it happens to everyone. But I think that it stays within the limits of what it is, unless something else expands. And that's what I seek. Okay? Because even the most violent person, Sonali, who has the most violent thoughts, will come and tell you this. I will come and tell you, 25 years ago, I heard this flute in this village, and I've never cried like that in my life. I may hate that individual for every ideology the person speaks about, but I can't say that that's not true. Now the question is, what happened? That's what interests me in the post-conversation.
The feeling which came through in that performative act,
okay,
that came through, which transcended which was, I think, the most striking at that point of time, which got communicated. It wasn't intended for an audience.
No. I have a question. I'm going to probe you here. You said, what was that got communicated to you?
Okay, so this is like early morning, somebody getting ready for class, we master students and things like that. So it's in that context, she's not aware that she's singing.
No, I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about you.
What about?
So, what is it that stays with you for 25 years?
No, in her singing, what was most moving was the emotion. I mean, that came out in that. And I think when I cut across to different, like even European languages that I don't understand, but the music has struck some resonance. It has.
So, can I ask you another question? I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. I have to just to pause you there.
Right.
So, is it the quality that individual showed at that moment that touched you, or is it the music?
The music. The feeling of the music.
So no. I'm going to challenge that a little bit.
Right.
Okay. You did hear the music, but you heard something else, is what I'm trying to say. That's why it didn't matter whether you loved it or not. You've not actually told me anything about the music all this while, by the way.
I can't sing.
When I say nothing about the music, I meant not about the technicalities of the music. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. So I'm going to challenge your notion a bit and drop it there and leave it, not go beyond, and say that what probably touched you, which was where the music was the carrier, was a certain open quality of that individual that came through that music. Okay? And that openness opened something in you. Okay? It did come through the music. I'm not denying it at all. And I'm going to say that maybe you can just think over this. I'm not going to go beyond this. And that maybe that is that quality that stays with you. That something, you gasped. Not because you knew it was by Revere, or not because it was beautiful, not because you got the tune right, not because you knew the language, but there was something so deeply honest about what happened that honesty overwhelmed you.
The feeling behind what was the art.
Yes. So now we are discussing something else.
I think that's what you said in the beginning as well.
Sorry about that, Samantha.
No, the part about the feeling behind. Yes.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. Sometimes, because I think that's what sometimes communicates in a manner that the carrier becomes irrelevant.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
sir, and thank you, ma'am, for your question, and thank you, sir, for asking them so patiently, despite the fact that we've overshot the time so much. But thank you for being so gracious and patient with our questions. I would now like to request Anushka to please propose the word of thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krishna, for answering some very, very relevant questions, and thank you to the audience for asking some very relevant questions. Again, my apologies as well for exceeding time. With this, we come to the end of the talk and the question and answer session. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to TM Krishna sir for his insightful words and for taking the time out for us. I also express my immense gratitude to the audience for their patience and cooperation throughout the session. Once again, thank you for joining us. Please join us again for all of our very wonderful sessions tomorrow as well as Marzi day, right?